Tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rosie Cameron. Today I'll be talking about how instant feedback shaped self-efficacy in a first-year foundation maths course. Before I start, I want to pause and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where I currently live and work, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and also the traditional custodians of these lands here at UQ. And also, this research was conducted in Christchurch, Otatahi Aotearoa, which is why I started my talk by greeting you in Te Reo Māori. So before I kind of get underway, I want to pause and give you a working definition for self-efficacy. So really, I'm just focusing on the belief that one can succeed at a task. I need to hide these things. The belief that one can succeed at a task. So it's really task-focused, and it can be quite specific in terms of the particular problem or a worksheet, or it can be expanded to think about, say, mathematics self-efficacy. And so there's a whole lot of research on self-efficacy and mathematics self-efficacy in particular, so that it predicts things like motivation and persistence and help-seeking behaviours, that it also predicts performance, so academic achievement, and that second point is pointing out that there's this reciprocal relationship between self-efficacy and performance, that having high self-efficacy is a predictor of success, and then likewise succeeding at a task informs your belief about your ability to succeed in similar tasks. This third point, the quote from this sort of survey paper, recognises that there's a lot of research around the influence of self-efficacy and affect more generally on things like cognition and learning outcomes and student success. So there's a whole lot of work, and that's just a little bit of a snapshot. And then importantly for us, there's work that shows that self-efficacy can change. So the 2017 paper I referenced there looked at how self-efficacy changed over first year at university. I think they were an engineering cohort. And then Tanya's paper, the Regal and Evans paper, looked at self-efficacy can be different depending on the different learning task or how you're engaging in that learning task. So there are things that we can do to influence self-efficacy. So that's great that we can have hope about that. Now for this talk, I want us to have this kind of model in our minds, which I think summarises a lot of the research around how self-efficacy interacts with things. So I've got these arrows saying that it influences motivation and persistence and help-seeking, and that in turn, if you're doing all of those things, that's good things that's going to influence your performance and success, which then kind of feeds back into more self-efficacy. So we've got sort of a virtuous cycle happening there. And this kind of model, I think, makes some intuitive sense as well. We could think about, if I believe that I can succeed, then I'm going to enjoy the task. I'm going to have that motivation to engage in that task. Or if I believe I can succeed and I reach some difficulty, I'm going to persist despite that difficulty because I believe I'll eventually succeed. Whereas in contrast, if I don't really believe I'm going to succeed and I reach a difficulty, I'm much more likely to kind of give up at that point and not have that persistence. And likewise with engaging in help-seeking behaviours. If you don't really believe you can succeed, why should I ask for help? Because it's not really going to help me. Or if I think it is going to help me, then I might reach out for that help, and that will then drive performance by getting that help that I need. So keep this kind of picture in your mind. And we're going to keep talking about, we're going to come back to self-efficacy in a moment. I want to kind of sidetrack a little bit and think about e-assessments. Because we're all most of us are using a lot of e-assessments, so online quizzes. And so there's a lot of use of that happening. There's growing research on the use of e-assessments. So Kinnear and a whole bunch of people, that paper's referencing a research agenda paper, which lists a whole lot of research questions that people are kind of interested in how do we design e-assessments? How do they influence students? What are all the sorts of things going on in e-assessments or quizzes? And there's a whole lot of research, which I won't kind of really go into at this point, but basically to summarise that there are risks and benefits to e-assessments. So some of the affordances are obviously scalability. Once you've invested in your e-assessment, you can roll that out to however many students. You can do things like instant feedback or multiple attempts. Basically, as much feedback as you like for free once you've done your setup cost. There's some risks involved, like e-assessments can tend to overemphasize procedural knowledge. We've seen yesterday already a lot of talks around, well, we value different types of knowledge and different types of things in education, but also that you can do different things with quizzes. You can assess conceptual knowledge or other things in the quizzes. It's just the sort of general tendency of e-assessments. It's easier to assess procedural knowledge. Then there's equity issues to keep in mind, things like equity of access or things like, is there a digital native? I don't think so. But there's this kind of things to keep in mind. But there are a lot of affordances and benefits of e-assessments. And so the question I want us to think about is, well, how do we use e-assessments? How do we design these e-assessments? And can we do that in a way that influences self-efficacy, presumably positively? And so that leads to my main research question to think about today, which is, how does the if I have an instant feedback in an e-assessment, how does that instant feedback influence self-efficacy? And in particular for first-year foundations maths students. So that set the scene. This study then was work from New Zealand, so a foundations course in a New Zealand university, so students who have not met the prerequisites to go into Calculus 1. And so they're doing this foundations or catch-up course at university. It's got scale, so about 500 students in semester 1 often. So any kind of intervention needs to work at scale. Students have very vast mathematical background. So it's a very challenging course to teach because some students are coming in really struggling to rearrange linear equations. Some students are coming in having seen calculus before, they just didn't quite pass the units at school. And so it's had low pass rates because of that there's a lot going on in the course. So this intervention took the homework sheets and put it into a large weekly online quiz. So this is using Stack, which takes a computer algebra system and plugs it into Moodle. And so you're not doing multiple choice, it's marking it algebraically. So you can essentially mimic the regular homework sheet that you'd normally put on a PDF or print out. You can mimic all of those questions and more in this Stack quiz, and it marks it automatically. The affordances of Stack is a whole other talk, so I won't go into that, but I want to focus on the checking mechanism. So you probably can't really see that, but I've got a question here and I've attempted this question. I think the answer is 9/17 and I've checked it and that's incorrect. And so then and then each question has this little check button underneath it. So I just do that one question and I get that feedback really, really instantly that says I haven't done that question correctly, and then I reattempt it. And so I correct myself and I click check and I get, well, is this correct now? And then for those of you with good eyesight, you can see that my mark for this question is 0.9 out of 1. And so I've only lost a 10% penalty by doing that first attempt. And so the quiz was set up so that every question gets checked immediately and can reattempt. You can reattempt as many times as you like. You can do the whole quiz again if you like. So I'm giving away marks. If you went through the quiz and it took you 3 attempts on every single question, you'd still end up with 80%. This is all the work that I want them to do in the week. So this is all of their homework is in the quiz. And so that's a large portion of their final grade. I think it was changed over a few semesters, about 25% of their final grade. So this is the work that I want them to do that week. So then I did some focus groups on the students who'd been through this course. And so I had 2 focus groups of students. I think there were about 7 students in each group. It was I think it was about 2/3 of the way through the semester. So they've done a fair amount of the work in the course. And a colleague ran the discussion groups for me because I was the lecturer at the time. And there were some open-ended prompts for them. So questions around their experience with these quizzes, their confidence in maths, how had they engaged with the quiz or with the course, so what their learning strategies were. and that open-ended kind of prompts for them. Then I did some thematic analysis of the data, so some iterative coding with that self-efficacy model underlying that, and had to add an extra theme of resources, which I'm going to come back to later on. So we've got that help-seeking, motivation, and persistence themes that we're looking for in that data. So some of the results, just to give you a flavour of what came out of those discussions. Looking for motivation kind of language in the data. So there was a lot of kind of different ways of framing positive motivation that came out of the data. So students talked about enjoyment. There was a really nice interaction in one of the groups around, they all agreed that they really liked seeing that green tick. They got a lot of satisfaction out of that. This first quote here is, I ended up unexpectedly enjoying maths quite a bit. So that's quite a nice, that enjoyment and motivation came through. The other thing that came through in terms of motivation was that the value of the task was made visible to them, that they could see its value. So this quote kind of illustrates that the quiz is really helpful. The quizzes are definitely the most effective way to practice the math. I don't know why these students are suddenly American. They weren't. But these students could see the value of this task. There were still some negative things that came through. Some frustration was mentioned at points. Some students mentioned it got tedious. There was some repetition in there, which was by design. But there were some negative things to balance out that, but a lot of positive kind of motivation type language there. In terms of persistence, there were comments that came through that the students continued their effort despite difficulty. So comments like it was long, but, or it was challenging, but kind of language, which I think indicates that persistence despite some sort of challenge. These comments are, you're just making yourself start and pushing through. So pushing through that, some difficulty, and then you learn from it. And then I thought the quizzes were quite long, but they're really good. And so there's those kind of phrases indicated some persistence was coming out. And then in terms of the instant feedback, the green ticks as they went along made their progress visible to them. And so they could see their progress, which informed their persistence. There was a bit of discussion around challenging questions, which one group called spicy questions, that they didn't like them unless they were signposted as such, and then they didn't mind them. There were some kind of negative ones, which I'll circle back to a little bit later as well, around time constraints as a limiting factor. So there were some comments like it was just too long without a but. So persistence came through. Help-seeking behaviours came through, not quite as much as the others, but there were some really nice conversations around learning to ask for help. So one comment was, I definitely learnt when to let go and just move on and get help actually, because it's not a big thing. And so that's quite a nice reflection of that process of learning to ask for help. There were discussions around how they use the tutors, some frustrations with the tutor availability, with the timing or preparedness. So some kind of frustrations around the help seeking, and some awareness of using less useful tutor usage, or more useful ways of using the tutors. But that did come through in the discussions. So I mentioned, so that's our model that kind of we should be keeping in mind. And so we've seen all of these things happening. The motivation is happening, and persistence and help seeking, and all of them are kind of a lot of positive things and some negative things. So not completely smooth sailing, but a lot of nice things happening there in these conversations. There were some comments that kind of stuck out as not quite fitting into any of those buckets. And so I've chosen kind of just a few of those. So the first one is, sometimes I'd leave a few questions unanswered just because I had other stuff that needed done. And so this notion that, I could finish it, but I just ran out of time. I've just got other workload constraints or whatever else is going on. And so that's not necessarily a matter of persistence or not. It's just a hard constraint for the student. Another kind of theme that came out was sometimes the tutors can't even figure out what the challenge question is actually doing. So it's a kind of, I asked for help, but it's not there. The tutor's not quite prepared for that question. So that's a frustration. And then a positive kind of one is when I can work through the lecture notes and find out where I get this answer from, it's quite nice and satisfying. And so this idea of getting that satisfaction from being able to, having those resources provided to you and being able to find where that answer came from was a satisfying experience for them. And so I think what was missing so far from that kind of little framework model that we had was this idea of resources that the students have. And so when I say resources, I'm kind of using that as a fairly broad thing to capture things like student time and workload. What background knowledge are they coming in with? What scaffolding are they provided with? What help is available with the tutors and so forth? And then also the resources of the course, like the course notes and things. And I think some of the data was suggesting that this is mediating the effect of the self-efficacy. That if they have or don't have that resources, that mediates how effective how that self-efficacy influences the things like motivation and persistence. And so this is my kind of idea of what I think is the data is saying from these focus groups, is that self-efficacy improves motivation and persistence in help seeking, but it has to the resources have to be there. Or rather, if the resources aren't there, that kind of gets in the way, that hampers the motivation or the persistence or help seeking. So a kind of hypothetical scenario is, suppose I believe I can succeed, but I don't have the available resources I can't find an worked example in the notes. And so that's going to cause me frustration. I could succeed if I had the example, but that's causing me frustration rather than enjoyment. Or I believe I can succeed if I have the available time. And then if I don't have the available time, well, I just don't have it. And so that's this is just out of my focus group data. So it's really kind of a hypothesis more than anything else at this stage. But I think is kind of what I could see happening in those discussions there, that what resources the students had were mediating how the self-efficacy influenced these other factors. So to summarize, I think the instant feedback did improve the self-efficacy through motivation, persistence, and help seeking, but the resources can moderate these effects, whether they're there or not there. Practical implication, I think, is that this kind of showed some small design tweaks that you could make that would improve self-efficacy or the affective component for students. So things like even flagging the hard questions or improving tutor preparation. Not that that's a small tweak. But those kind of considerations could improve not just the design of the quiz itself, but the student self-efficacy. And then a bigger kind of task is it would be good to get some quantitative testing for that expanded model, which I think should include some foundation students, because because these were foundation students, that allowed some of the data to be really rich and show they were upfront about their challenges and their struggles and their unexpected enjoyment. So I'll finish there. This is a paper in the IGMS special issue, so if you're interested, you can read more. So yeah, thank you, and I'll finish there. Yes.
It's related to the integrity of the quiz and start to ensure the students on the school, which are GPT about 25%.
Yeah. So that's a good question. So the question was how secure is this? It's not secure. First of all, this data is pre-ChatGPT, but it's not pre-Symbolab or Wolfram Alpha. They could look that up if they wanted to. They've still got to go through 50 questions and put all 50 questions through whatever system. Maybe they learn by accident in that process. They're welcome to do that. There's still a hurdle in the final exam. Yes, Kerry.
Nice talk, Rosie. Thank you very much. It seems to me when we're talking about the assumption, there's this assumption that the gain of the resources is with students happily that they succeed or even. So to me that implies that we want to be really consciously about how we provide our students with that have experiences where they can succeed. My question to you is, because what advice would you have for when you come up with these other colleagues and they can talk about like creating spaces for success, particularly that may be below the bar of where they perceive things should be at.
Yeah.
You know, like what type of advice have you got for those colleagues? They've got the colleagues that go, no, you can't, you don't get down, you don't do it like they've got to be here right now. Or we've also had classical people in the management that says, oh, it's okay. We let these students into this course and they fail, it's going to be good for them. Like, what's your advice? I'd love to know what advice is that you came back.
Oh, yeah. So because these quizzes were so big, you can put some warm-up questions in there. And so that's something that can help with colleagues is framing questions as preparation questions or warm-up questions. And that gives you, and the students kind of get used to that. The first however many questions in the quiz, I know I can do. And so I can get those under my belt before we go on. And that kind of is a way of selling it to colleagues maybe as well, that this is not the real content, this is the warm-up content, I guess. That's a big challenge though, is how do you gatekeep your course and not let students in if you don't think they can succeed? And if so, who decides that and how? Or do you let them all in, but then you've got a responsibility for them, which I think you've recognised you've got that responsibility to not just let them sink, but to provide them with supports. So I don't know that I've answered your question except to echo your sentiments.
My feelings again is you're letting someone forward with the responsibility to provide a situation to succeed.
Yeah.
So therefore then they build their self-belief in their methods, which means that then they can access all the different resources.
And I think online quizzes provide a nice means of doing that, because you can put a whole lot of easy questions in there as well as other stuff. I don't know. We had a question at the front.
Thank you. It's very great talk. I had a question about the tweaking for the hard questions and flagging them.
Yeah.
Do you think it could have a negative effect? Like, as in students kind of go, if you don't tell them it's hard, they'll attack it and go, oh, but I meant, you know, like I found it a little bit challenging, but I got there. Whereas if you go, this is hard, they're going to go, oh, it's okay, I can't do it then. Right, and I don't know. It's a genuine question. Is it better? Don't worry, you're going to struggle, and so therefore they go, if I don't quite get it, or does it turn students off?
These groups, kind of the general consensus in the focus groups of 14 students, but the general consensus was that if it was flagged as challenging, they would give it a go. And the particular questions that I'm thinking of, maybe it doesn't matter if they don't try it. Maybe these are actually genuine challenge questions. A-band questions, yeah. So I think on balance, I'd rather tell students that they're challenging questions. I don't have that literature at my fingertips, so I'm sure there's a whole lot of research on that. Yes, Clemency.
One of the features of these things, I think, online, really wonderful that it came to be assessed with the students pick up a writing implement actually being right up there to the panel. People are in an exam type session. Suddenly, abilities that they have practiced. Do you have ideas how this will mitigate that or incorporate the various platforms that wants to communicate on?
Yeah, I mean that's a big weakness of moving everything to online quizzes is that then they're not writing until the assessments. I had tried at one point to make the write your working down part of the assessment. It's not an attendance mark now, it's a write your working down mark. But I don't know, I don't think that was super successful because you've got to get then the tutors to enforce that. So I think it is a big challenge and something that needs addressing in the model is thinking about balancing that. We want them to be writing, so we need to get them to write. I'm sure we're running out of time. You've had your hand up for a little while, but
But at least you've got meaningful connection. And if you've got really very bright students, most students on a quiz, the educator will be doing fix with them. We use these. You know what I mean? Like how many of our students are we seeing them answering on like quiz with their actually because of I mean, obviously, it's really not engaged.
Some try and do it without working out, which is doesn't work very well. Some write working out, but it's garbage. It's a mess, and so it's not mathematical communication. So it is still a challenge. I'll finish there and hand over to Leanne because I want to hear from her.